The song "Sorta Surviving," as the title would suggest, is kind of about just making it through life, and when you've gone through something like a traumatic injury or some major life upset, which many of us have in different forms. I think I realized that there is different ways of getting through, and they're not all just because you make it through something doesn't mean that you're unchanged by it. In fact, usually it means that when you get through something, you survive it, but you also sort of change and adapt to that new circumstance, and that's kind of what that song's about for me.
How did it? How did this album and say the way you approach songs or the way you've been writing? Would you say it's changed as a result of your traumatic experience?
I would like to think that my approach to writing songs was not affected by anything externally that happened in my life. I think some of the events in my recent past have definitely affected my perspective on life and on health and on fortune and misfortune and things like that. But I think my process of writing music has always been pretty organic, and I don't really have a sequence of things that I do. If I feel like I think of something good, then I'll write it down, and I try to not put any pressure on myself to write music, and with a few exceptions, it's worked out pretty well. Sometimes I need to be a little more disciplined, but I kind of like it when I don't have to be.
There's a line that I wanted to draw, and I didn't really know the best way to ask a question, but I was kind of saying, you've played so much of the history of California from, going back, broke down in Bakersfield, to some of the guys that you cover from time to time that you've been known to like. You're also producing musicians of today. There's this line of the last century of like California music that sort of you're in the middle, like you've kind of touched both ends. I don't know if it's talking about some of the guys you work with on the record or talking about some of the icons of the past, but some way to sort of show this timeline of guitar, of California guitar. Do you know what I'm getting at?
First time I ever heard Merle Haggard's songwriting, I think, was Graham Parsons singing "Sing Me Back Home." I think it was like some kind of Birds or Burrito Brothers thing. I'm not sure what it was, but I liked the song so much that I had to figure out what was the story behind that song, and I found out pretty quickly that it was written by Merle Haggard. And of course I'd heard his name, but I never really heard his music. Having grown up in suburban Los Angeles, it's not really something that gets around too much. And when I first heard him sing and heard some of his songs, I was just, it reached me, and it was just a sound that I really loved, and it was something also that I could relate to because the range of his voice kind of, and I felt like I could maybe sing in that zone a little bit, and just the way he told stories of growing up in California. It was a music that was specifically of the southern half of California, which is something that I felt like I could relate to, having grown up there. And the Mother Hips has carried a lot of that style and that sound into our music all throughout our career. And obviously with this record particularly, I've carried a lot of that sound into the songs.
And speak a little bit about some of the stuff that you've produced, some of the, and go back as far as you'd like, but just to be able to talk a little bit about some of the younger musicians you've worked with, if you want to use the word mentor or not, but, the fact that you have an ear, you're in the production game, and you're carrying that tradition forward.
I was probably in about 2000, the year 2000, the Mother Hips had taken a hiatus, and we thought we were done. We didn't know it was a hiatus until we started playing again. But at that point, I was living in my van, and I wanted to learn how to record more. And so I got a little studio apartment in San Francisco and bought some rudimentary recording equipment and started learning how to use it with the intention of recording myself. But I realized pretty quickly that it's a lot easier to learn how to do it on somebody else, so you don't have to be the performer and the engineer at the same time. And one of the first people that I ran across that I was inspired to see if they wanted to record with me was Nikki. Nikki Fraioli was her name at the time. And she had a beautiful voice, really nice singing voice, and I heard her sing at a party one day, and I thought, wow, you're a great singer. And she didn't have any idea that she was. And so to me, that was like the perfect kind of person to try to learn my craft on, because I was really into the way she sang, but she didn't really care that much about her own thing. So I knew I could like learn with her and not have her get impatient or pissed off at me not knowing what I was doing. So she came up to San Francisco, and we started recording some stuff in my studio apartment, and I kind of tried to teach her things that I knew about singing and about using microphones and about how to actually sing certain styles and songwriting and all that stuff. And it was cool. I mean, we ended up falling in love and ended up getting married, in fact, and having a band. And I recorded a bunch of, produced a bunch of her records, and it was a really good time. It was a really inspiring time.
Yeah, there was a lot of, we're here at YouTube, and there was obviously the Gramblers hit the viral charts or whatever with the van jam, and that wasn't the first one. There's a mention in there about the perseverance of doing these, because you were on this drive, and you were the producer of the band, you were in the band, you were probably driving the van, you were probably editing the shot. You were kind of doing it all there. Talk about that time.
Yeah, we were touring. The Gramblers were touring a whole bunch, and everyone in the band was really working really hard and had a really good attitude. And it had been a while since I had been in a band that was like in a van driving all over the place. I had done that as a younger man and gotten pretty burnt out on it. But there I was again, and this time I was with my wife and a bunch of friends, and it was fun. It felt like going back to my youth a little bit. It was pretty cool. And it wasn't even my idea. I think it was Steve Adams, the bass player. I wasn't even in the van when they first did it, but they strapped the iPhone up onto the rear view mirror of the van, and Nikki was driving the van, and they were all playing like little instruments, and they played a cover song. I forget what the first one was, but I think the first one they did to send to me, because I was unable to make that tour because I was playing with my other band. And after that, we started doing that. I think we did like 26 of the van sessions or something like that. And I think the Hall & Oates one that went viral, I forget what year it was, but it was probably like 2011 or 12. I don't remember, but that was probably number 21 or something like that. We'd already done a lot of them. And I don't even know if it was the best one, but it was just the one that got, like, it just started getting all those little tentacles that went out, and the timing was just right. And it was crazy. We were sitting there watching the numbers just roll over. It was intense.
It's cool.
It was crazy.
Have a touch of viral stardom. Not to belabor the point on the old guys, but I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the guys you made the record with. We were talking a little earlier about Gene Chrisman, David Rowe, super old school guys, and I don't know anything about the making of the record or with those guys, or the sort of the tradition that they brought.
When the idea for this record came together, I was talking with Dave Schools from Widespread Panic, who was the producer, and he had just made a record at the Cash Cabin in outside of Nashville with Todd Snyder. And so Dave he had access to this kind of private studio, and I was stoked. I couldn't believe that we could get in there. And when I started telling Dave about what I wanted the record to sound like and what I wanted it to be, he immediately started researching musicians. And being in Nashville where we had access to a lot of different guys. And Dave had heard of these, previous generation, or maybe even 2 generations earlier, of these older guys that were still around and still playing well. And these are guys, Dave Rowe and Gene Christman are guys that played on some really legendary recordings, like Aretha Franklin, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Roy Orbison, just like crazy cool old recordings. And there they were. They showed up, and Dave Rowe made all the charts, the Nashville charts, and showed them to Gene, and they would listen to one time to the demo that I had recorded of just me playing acoustic guitar in the control room, and they'd listen and kind of make a few notes, and then they'd go into the tracking room and just sit down with like their glasses on and look at the chart and just rip through 2 takes, and it was just money.
No way.
It's so cool.
Was
I've
that
never
easy?
seen anything like it. When I first started making records, this was in 1991, there was no internet, of course. There was no... digital recording might have just been maybe just in its rudimentary stages, but no one was really using it. So it was all tape machines and large format consoles. And even when I started learning how to record in around 2000, it was still like mostly... I learned on... I owned 3 or 4 different kinds of tape machines, and it wasn't until much later that I started learning how to use a computer. But it's kind of nice to have a foot in both, and tape machines, they're still around, but they don't get used that much anymore.
You're drawn to these lyrics and these stories of geography and of like, dare I say, the way it was. A lot of these old stories are what is captivating, and I keep feeling this feeling of like keeping this flame alive of the old generation, right? It's a brand new record, but you've got some of these old, songs that say something about obviously where you come from. Is there something to the geography that we can connect, that the outdoorsness and the expanse, to some of your other passions, maybe of the outdoor passions? Is there a sort of a comment in there along those lines?
I love writing about geography, and like a lot of my songs have a sense of place. That's always been an important part of writing to me. On this record, maybe not quite as much, but I've tapped that vein pretty heavily throughout my career, and I think it probably has to do with my feeling that being outdoors it kind of takes you out of any time frame, any time period. Like when you walk out into the woods, or you walk along some river, or up in the mountains, it could be 100 years ago, or it could be 100 years in the future. It doesn't matter. It sort of takes you out of time, and I think that's as I was saying before, that's just such a nice antidote for all this intense signal that we get from all around us all the time, looking at our phones, looking at billboards and traffic and the news, and it's just so much stuff that's so overwhelming, and all you have to do is just walk out where there's no people and no roads, and it just, all that pretty much just drops away. And I've always found that to be immensely valuable to my peace of mind.